Hey there, friends. Dave Paulides, Canine Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thank you for being here, and this is a missing persons episode, and we will discuss two cases today. Some bookkeeping material. This movie right here, I've had a lot of requests about when is that going to be available online. We've had our struggles with this new company getting it back up. It's going to be up sometime in the next month. Trust me on this. And if you can't get it online, you can get the DVD from me at our website. Other responses, Missing 411 Washington that just came out. Thank you so much for all the positive comments I've received about the book. Yes, it was a labor of love, and it has some of the most unusual cases we've ever dealt with. Again, you can get that from only me. And our website is NA, like North America, nabigfootsearch.com. Go to the online store and you will find it. The other thing that's going on is, as of late, seems to be there's a lot of young men disappearing. And I recently did a case from Osgood, Indiana. And if you look at the mileage from Osgood, Indiana to the Tennessee disappearances that I covered, it's not that far. And there's two cases in Tennessee that are recent, and then there's Osgood, Indiana. And why are they focusing right there? Why are those three disappearances in that area? Yeah. Exactly. And our guys are on it. When a case gets worldwide publicity or huge national publicity, like Riley's case, Riley Strain, our guys are on it. It's those cases that don't get NBC, CBS, ABC News covering them. Those are the ones we don't hear about. Once we hear about it, we're all over it. And Riley's case, from day one, we're on it. I feel great compassion for the families that have been losing kids. It's horrific. And some of you have commented, well, Dave, this obviously isn't a 411 case. If you actually watch the video, I say that. And I'm walking you through these cases so you can be that critical thinker. So when you see a case come up in the news, you can say, well, yeah, that's not a 411 case. I won't forward that to Dave. Yeah, but this one is. I'm going to forward it to him. So you can be that deciding factor. I'm giving you the education. We need investigators like you in every state, in every province, in every country. Because without you guys, I wouldn't hear from them. So I know this may seem mundane and repetitive, but I know not every person watches every video, and we need this. The other comment I get occasionally, why don't you ever state an opinion? Why don't you just come out and say what it is? If I knew what it was, I would say it. And my thoughts on cases where there's not a clear answer would just embarrass me later, because many times we're wrong. And which is one of the reasons why we like to wait for a case to evolve over a month, 2 months, 3 months before we'll comment on it, because we don't want to look like an idiot. Now, the cases today fall right in line with Missing 411 and what I've written about in the past. This first case involves a girl, 22 months old. I want you to think about this. For the parents out there, 22 months old. If you had never heard of Missing 411, and I asked you, hey, if I set your daughter down in the middle of the desert at 22 months old, what are they going to do? Well, what do you mean, Dave? Well, if we set her down and there was nobody around, what would they do? Would they just take off walking? Would they play in the sand? Would they stare at the sun? What would they do? And then come nighttime, what would they do? Keep that in mind when I tell you this story. Joyce went missing February 3rd, 1936, near Mungindi, west of Brisbane, Australia. This is the Gold Coast of Australia right here. Here's Brisbane. And here's the city. It's really a station that we're talking about. And then south of there is where the girl disappeared. This is a very, very desolate area out in here. Nothing really going on. Ranches, sheep herders, cows. Not a lot. Now her father, Joyce's dad, was what's called a boundary rider. Now that's an Australian term for a small station or a small ranch city employee that's tasked with checking the condition of the fences, collecting escaped livestock, doing general repairs around the ranch. It was considered a good job at the time, and it took a lot of responsibility. A lot of times you're out there in the middle of nowhere for a long time by yourself. Kind of like cowboys rounding up cattle out on the range. Just a different term. Well, the Fielding family lived in a small community of cottages out here in the middle of nowhere. And they were about 300, these cottages were about 300 yards from the wool sheds where the majority of the men did their work. So on February 3rd at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mrs. Fielding took Joyce from their cottage and they walked the 300 yards to the wool sheds. And Mrs. Fielding had to do some chores out there, did them, and then she turned around to look for her daughter. She was gone. Well, she searched for an hour and then contacted the station manager. That station manager immediately made a series of calls to other stations rallying support, and soon 50 men were on site searching for that young girl. So remember, it was after 4 o'clock. Girl's gone. Dad's out on the range. Mom's got 50 people now helping to look. This area is a lot of scrub, a lot of dirt, sand, out in the middle of nowhere. Well, the 50 men searched till dark, and then the next day, the station manager had already made other calls, and they were going to have 100 men responding from a city 40 miles away, coupled with the 50 that they had that were going to stay on site. And then they also had a series of motorists that had responded, and they gave them the task of searching every road, however minute, everywhere on the ranch and around the ranch. Well, they had several men that were really proficient horsemen. And those guys were put up into pairs, and they rode about 50 feet apart, and they were going to do grid searches of the ranch in the area where she disappeared. And then they also had Aboriginal searchers that worked for the ranch. They decided to take food and water, and they were going to stay on foot to search, and what was said in the articles, the wilder areas. The ranchers described the area as very rough, sand ridges, scrub, many deep rabbit holes, and wild pigs were in the area. They were also concerned about eagle hawks, and they said some of those birds were big enough to pick up a young girl. The day she disappeared and the first day of the search were described as extremely hot. Businessmen from as far away as 50 miles responded with food and water for all the searchers. And then they had additional men from further communities dispatched to go to the search scene. When I listened to the organization that went up quickly for this little girl, it was amazing. I know even today, that station manager did an outstanding job rallying people to help. And they took it seriously from the first minute. So she disappeared February 3rd. February 5th. They've already went through one full day of searching. They had about 5 hours of searching the day she disappeared. So now we're talking about 6:45 a.m. on February 5th. Late on February 4th, tracks were found and they were followed until dark. A professional tracker found one of her shoes and then lost track of her tracks in deep grass. Now, every time I do a story like this, it seems that Aboriginal trackers come into play the same way Native American trackers came into play on missing people in the United States in the early 1900s. Well, there was an elder Aboriginal tracker named Les Crombo. Very well respected, known throughout the area, who had came to look for Joyce. Well, Les was walking through a grassy area, yelling at other people, searchers, when she heard Les and ran towards him and jumped into his arms. Well, Les carried her back to other searchers, and she was transported to a local nurse. This place was so far from anything that they didn't have a hospital nearby, but a nurse was. And the nurse said that she was slightly feverish and dehydrated, slightly dehydrated, but in good condition. That's phenomenal. Why? Because each day of the search was described as extremely hot. She didn't have any water for 2 days. At 22 months old, I would say that at that point there was a 50-50 chance she would have been alive. But she ran into his arms. I want you to know that kids that age, young kids that are missing, when it gets dark, they sit down, they find a place, and they go to sleep. That's what they've been taught to do, and kids don't like moving at dark. So I want you to think about something. Really, Joyce had 1 day and about 4 hours of sunlight to move. Searchers stated, and you can sit down and take a deep breath. Searchers stated she traveled 12 to 15 miles. I've stated this before, I'll state it again. One of the things that we've identified in our research is the phenomenal distances young kids travel. Now, somebody like you, me, somebody who's healthy adult, traveling 12 to 15 miles in a day? Maybe. But I know most of the adults I know couldn't do it. But a 22-month-old child? You believe that? Search and rescue manuals set the stage today for searchers on where to look. Search and rescue manuals say that somebody 1 to 3 years old will be found 95% of the time in 2.8 miles or less from the point they were last seen. And if they disappeared on dry, flat land, the maximum distance would be 5.6 miles. But now we're talking double that at 22 months old. Do you find that believable? Now, I would say maybe the searchers were off. Maybe the estimates were off. But they said 12 to 15 miles. I'm sorry, that blows me away. Especially in Australia, where they describe scorching heat. It's not like you're going to really run through that part of the country on a scorching hot day and not become immediately dehydrated and die. Somehow Joyce managed this. And I'm telling you, there's nobody in search and rescue that believes that a 22-month-old child is moving at night. Sorry, it just doesn't happen. So, that's Joyce Fielding. And again, the name of that city was Moongindi. Moongindi, I'll show the map again. Just south of there is where she disappeared. This is the ocean out here. This is the east coast of Australia, and that's Brisbane. East coast, that's Brisbane. Interesting thing about this, all of the disappearances in Australia are on the east coast of Australia. None are on the west. And why is that? It's pretty weird, isn't it? Okay, the next case involves a young boy named Clarence Rudd, 3 years old. Young. Missing August 12th, 1943. 7 years after Joyce. Missing 180 miles northeast of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. In a place called the Shamrock Valley. That's east of a city called St. Paul and 9 miles north of Elk Point. And the RCMP Edmonton made it a point to say it was 9 miles north of Elk Point. Here's Elk Point, 9 miles north, right here. This came up when I ran Shamrock Valley. And tons of water everywhere through this area. Creeks, rivers, lakes, lots of water. You can look it up on a map. Elk Point, Alberta. The area has a lot of big trees, waters, rivers, and creeks, per the statement of Edmonton RCMP. Now, the story starts off that on August 12th, 1943, Thursday, was a Thursday, Mrs. Rudd took her 2 boys, and they were going to go with friends that lived in the area to a specific region where there was a lot of blueberries that were in bloom. And when they arrived, she asked her older son, and no age was given, to watch Clarence, who was 3 years old. It was described that about an hour later, Mrs. Rudd checked on the kids, found the older boy quickly, and said, "Hey, where's Clarence?" And he goes, "I don't know, he wandered off." The same scenario has happened so many times on missing persons cases. So Mrs. Rudd got the other people that she was with, and they all started to search for Clarence. By noon, they couldn't find anybody, so they contacted the RCMP detachment in St. Paul. They got the RCMP on site, and that search that first day went till dark. And the RCMP in St. Paul immediately requested a dispatch of a canine from Edmonton. They recognized that something wasn't right here, and they weren't having any luck, and they weren't finding any tracks. Well, by the next day, everyone in this small city of St. Paul had heard about Clarence being missing, and massive numbers of people started to arrive into that area where he was lost. The RCMP canine from Edmonton was en route. Search area described by the RCMP as thickly wooded, difficult searching in their words. And people searched for 12 hours on August 13th, finding nothing. There is a ton of pressure on the person in charge of searching, because everybody is looking to that person for direction. Many times, in fact, the vast majority of times, the person directing the search has no history of search and rescue. They might have had training, but they've never done one. But they have to look like they're competent and they know what they're doing. August 14th to 15th, searchers were still on scene, doing grid searches of the area. Canine had arrived and was spending second day on scene, finding no scent trail. And that was blowing away searchers because they expected the canine to walk right to Clarence. August 16th, 24-hour rain, heavy rain, inundates the area. RCMP stated that they feared that all the scent and all the tracks were obliterated. And they announced at the end of the 16th that they were going to end all searches. Well, August 17th, things changed. Apparently, Edmonton got a word from somebody that they needed to keep searching. So Edmonton ordered everyone to stay on site and to keep searching. August 18th, no trace of the boy, no scent trail, no tracks. St. Paul was still supplying high numbers of searchers. So now we talked about Joyce Fielding, 12 to 15 miles away, 22 months old. Different scenario here. Heavily, thickly wooded area. First of all, you can't see very far, like you could possibly in Australia. This would make it tougher on a child to move very quick. And that 5.6 miles I said on dry flat land in a SAR manual, in this circumstance would be probably halved the distance that anyone would think that a young child could cover. And again, it was that 1 to 3 year old bracket, and Clarence falls within that. August 20th, they decided to change the scenario a bit. Right near where they were searching for berries, there was a very small creek. So small that they didn't think the creek could even conceal a body. And they stated that if Clarence had gotten in the water, it would have been up to maybe between his ankles and his knees. Very small creek, small flow. But what they decided is that they were going to check that in 4 miles in each direction to see if something had washed up onto the bank, see if they see any tracks. You get it. Well, they did that. They found nothing. August 21st to September 1st, the orders were to stay on site. This was a phenomenal number of days for 1943 to search for a child. I'm sorry, just is. And for the RCMP to commit that amount of time and stay on site was unusual. In total, 19 non-stop days of searching produced nothing. Canine never picked up a scent. There were no tracks leaving the area. And the search was termed on September 1st. Clarence was never found. But let's think about this. First of all, a subsection of the missing is berry pickers, which they were doing. Water was right there, creek. It was searched, nothing. Banks of creeks are good locations to find tracks. They found none. But I want you to think of something. If something, somewhere, someone, some foreign body came into that area and took Clarence, how do you get out of the area without leaving tracks? You walk right down the middle of the creek. A lot of people say, well, Dave, why do you keep mentioning this? That is one of the reasons why. Canines, no scent trail. Tracks, none. Weather, they had a 24-hour rainstorm right in the heart of the important part of the search. I want to read you something. I went into our data bank. I did some searching. And I wanted to see, within the time frames of this, how many people went missing that we categorized. So 1938, we had 16 people listed as missing that fit our profile. 1939, 10. 1940, 12. 41, 13. 42, it starts to drop. It goes from 13 to 8. Then it goes to 9 in 1943. 1944 hits a low of 7. So at this point, we have a high point in 38 of 16 to 7 in 1944. But hold your taters. 1945, it jumps up to 11. 46, we have 12. 47, 13. And now take a deep breath. 1948, 18. 49, 24. I've explained many times that starting in that mid-40s to early 50s, there was a huge spike in disappearances. Now, the two cases we talked about, 1936 and 1943, I always tell you, you have to think outside the box on these things. So for me, what happened just before that huge spike in numbers in 48 and 49? Anybody know? Well, again, I look at the unusual. June 24th, 1947. Yes, before the huge spike, Ken Arnold was flying in his private plane from Boise to Washington. And he was flying by the area of Mount Rainier, and he saw a series of UFOs fly by him in his plane. This was the actual start of the UFO being mainstream in America. It was his sighting. It's very famous. And then, what happened a month later? The famous Roswell crash. Excuse me. So that's two huge UFO events just before a big spike in numbers. Not saying what it means, just merely a coincidence, I guess. You can read about Ken Arnold's sighting. There's a big section in here about that because it happened in Washington in my book, Missing 411 Washington. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for hanging in there. I know a lot of you say that hearing about missing children is hard. Well, Joyce was found alive under the most unusual of circumstances. Clarence was never found. What can we learn by this? We learn a lot. Berry picking can be dangerous. Several people I have noted and written about in my books have disappeared and never been found. Adults too. In fact, one of the strangest cases of a berry picker disappearing is in my book right here, Missing 411 Washington. A professor. She was a professor that disappeared. Yeah. So, keep sending me in cases that match my profile. My email is canam, like Canadian American, canammissing@yahoo.com. And we have over 570 videos right here on this channel that you can watch. Please watch them. It helps us. Put them on while you're doing your homework and listen in the background. It helps. And post these on your social media. It greatly helps. Thanks for being here. Be kind to your neighbors. It's the kindness revolution. It costs nothing. Paulides out.